Hello, and welcome to, or welcome back to, MGBs and Other Stuff, a channel that explores MGBs and other things that interest me. Hopefully, you'll find it interesting too. If you enjoy this channel, please consider liking and subscribing. Hi folks, welcome back to my channel, or if you haven't visited before, welcome to my channel. Today is Friday, November 18th, 2022, and I don't think I've introduced myself yet. My name is Dave, and I own a 1963 MGB that I call Iris. Lives in the garage here all winter long, and today I was going to do, or finish a video that I started yesterday about how I prepare the car for the winter and for being stored in this unheated garage. But of course I woke up to this, and so I'm not going to do that today. I'm considering myself a little bit lucky though. About 25 miles that way in Buffalo, New York, they're getting about 4 feet of lake effect snow. So today I thought I'd talk about three-bladed fans. And this spring I had to change the water pump on Iris, and I ran into all sorts of problems with the fan being quite wobbly when I reassembled it, and I finally found a fix for it, and I thought I'd share that with you today. And next week we're supposed to get a bit of a break, 5 or 6 degrees, that's Celsius. And so I'll be able to get the car out into the driveway and give it a quick bath and an oil change and get some coolant in it, and I'll take you through that whole procedure that I use to winterize Iris for its long winter sleep. Accessing the water pump for removal is pretty straightforward. You do have to remove the rad though, and that means taking all the bolts out for the surround. I call it a shroud, but I think Haynes calls it a surround. And there's these 2 little ties that stabilize the surround. They need to come off as well. But once you remove all the hoses and the hose clamps and drain the rad, it's fairly straightforward. You find the position where you can move the surround out, and then the rad just literally lifts out of there. And I did that so I didn't have to remove the oil lines, because the oil lines run through the surround, and that's just an extra step that I wanted to avoid. But getting the rad out is really a must, because you'll need all the space you can get in there. The other thing I did while I was there anyways was to replace the gasket in the thermostat housing. I also ordered a new thermostat, but the one that was in place there was in pretty good condition, so I left it in, but now I have a spare in my parts inventory. So the installation of the water pump went great, worked fine. The problem came with the installation of the 3-bladed fan and the grommets, and the rest of this video will be concerned with that. So I've moved production indoors for now. It's pretty cold outside, and I didn't want to be handling metal bits with bare hands out in the cold. So this is the water pump that came off the car. It's an original one. It has the Mowag stamp on it. If anybody knows if these can be refurbished or restored, please let me know. I'd like to do that. It is original to the car, and it's a shame to just have it sitting on a shelf. I bought a new one from Moss Motors, and it's been fine, quite frankly, so I have no complaints with it. But there's just something about some original bits to it that I'd like to keep. So when I originally took the water pump off and the fan assembly off, I noticed that the fan itself was on there very securely. It didn't move or wobble or anything like that. And so I knew I was going to have to order some new parts. So the water pump came with new bolts and washers, but I had to order new rubber grommets for the fan. They act as a buffer in there somehow. And so I got those. I also ordered new metal spacers that go in the grommets themselves. I actually installed the old ones back in. They're exactly the same size and there was nothing wrong with the old ones. So I got all those parts, I reassembled it, and I noticed right away that it didn't seem to tighten down very much. And that was a concern for me, and that concern grew as the fan at idle was wobbling quite a bit and making a real clackety sound. And you can see by these old grommets, these are the first set of grommets I put on, they deteriorated quite bad and started splitting. So I found a picture that I actually had of the original configuration, and I'm going to put that on up right now so you can take a look at it. So I'm going to do a little mock-up of how that fan was originally installed. I don't have a pulley and a three-bladed fan out, so I'm just going to use some props for that. This is going to represent the pulley, which would fit over the nose of this water pump. So the pulley would be installed. It's a 1/4 inch bolt in there. Then a washer was set in between that and the fan. The fan, of course, has the rubber grommet installed and then the little metal spacer in between. So that was the next piece. Then another washer would go on. Then a lock washer. And then the bolt itself. And I'm gonna, takes a little finagling here, but I'm just gonna show you how it would be installed. So then it would just go into the water pump disc there. There we go. And then it got tightened down. So I tightened it as much as I dare, but I soon found out that you can only tighten it so much because this metal spacer really determines how far that bolt travels into this assembly. Now this little metal piece that I have here representing the fan is a little thinner than the actual fan, so the play is a little more prominent. But the issue was that that rubber grommet wasn't compressing enough to securely hold that fan in place, and it was wobbling to and fro and a little bit this way, and that what was causing the rattling. So like I said, I determined that it was really the spacer and not the grommet that was the problem. And that's kind of untrue as well, because when I hit the web pages to find out if other people were having this problem, there was a bunch of information on it. And I think the general consensus is that these replacement grommets are not the same grommets that would have been originally fitted to the car. I think they're a different material possibly. and certainly not as thick, because this little spacer actually peeks out on either side of it, and there's no way when you're putting that bolt in that the grommet's going to compress any. And especially now when you have these 1/4-inch washers on it, the 1/4-inch washers limit the travel that the bolt passes through, so there is absolutely no compression on that grommet. So the fix really is either to get a proper grommet, an original sized one, which I'm not sure if they're available. But on one of the MG Experience posts, a gentleman was having the same issue, and he thought he would grind down these metal spacers so that there was some room for compression. And so I thought that was a good idea, but my only problem is that I don't have a grinder, and I wanted to make sure that each one of these spacers was exactly the same length. I didn't want to have one being a fraction shorter or longer than the other, because that would offset the fan and the pulley and possibly be detrimental to the water pump. Some other posts said that they would forego the grommet altogether and just bolt the fan right onto the pulley, right through the pulley and onto the water pump. And that certainly holds it secure. The only issue is that that is a pretty big pass through there, and that's what the grommet is cushioning. And my fear with that was that there would be some travel eventually build up in there if the bolts ever loosened off. And the grommets must, serve a purpose, and I think that purpose is probably to mitigate vibration that may adversely affect the water pump over time. So since I wasn't really comfortable with my ability to grind down these spacers to the exact dimensions, I decided there must be another way to address this. And the fix I came up with was sort of the same idea, except instead of reducing the size of the spacers, I added 3/8 washers, and the 3/8 washers will pass over the spacer and compress the grommet as the bolt tightens down, and I'll show you how that works. So this is the assembly sequence that I use. So again, this is representing the pulley, and it's going on to the water pump on the nose portion here on this disc. Then a 1/4-inch washer. This is an old rusty one that actually came off the car. And then the fan itself with the grommet and the metal spacer. Now, I suppose you could put a 3/8 washer on either side of this, but I found it easier because sometimes you have to fiddle around with them a bit so that they're centered, that it's easier to do it, to do two together. So then the fan goes on with the grommet and the spacer, then the 3/8 washer, and you can see how that's going to pass through, and then another 3/8 washer, and then another 1/4-inch washer, and that'll push down on those 3/8 washers, compressing the grommet. And then of course I used a locking tab instead of a lock washer, and so that all just goes together. And you just got to make sure that those 2 3/8 washers are going to find their way over top of that spacer. I know my hands are in the way. And then that just gets tightened down. And so the limiting factor in the distance that bolt is going to travel is this metal spacer itself. So essentially, you either reduce the size of the spacer or you find some other way to compress it if you can't find a thicker rubber grommet. So that tightens down on there and compresses those grommets in. And now remember, you've got 4 of these attachment points. There's going to be one here, one here, one here, and one here. And once that fan is on there and all those 4 bolts are in, there's no movement this way, so it's much tighter now, and there's no movement this way. And like I've said, it's been the rest of the summer that I've used that setup, and it's been absolutely okay. I've gone back and looked at the grommets. I can't see any deterioration and wear on them. There's no fan movement. But I've also reasoned that the rubber grommets are there for a purpose. And again, I think it's probably to absorb vibration so it doesn't travel through the water pump into the bearings, and perhaps prolongs the life of the water pump. So I hope that was fairly clear. And if you have any questions, I'm going to post a picture of it right after I sign off here, of that assembly and all the different components I used. And if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. But thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful. And please consider subscribing and liking. Thanks again.